People sometimes ask me why I'm in Chicago. They say, do you have your roots in Chicago? And I reply, there are no roots in Chicago. I've got lots of old wires, quite tangled old wires. Of course, I have an attachment to the city in which I spent most of my life. I feel also that I have a peculiar understanding of it. There is, with that understanding, an undoubted antagonism to the harshness and the vulgarity of the place, a certain resentment also, which is undeniable, because I tried to be a writer in that city. A writer in a city like Chicago is a very strange beast indeed.
The Nobel Prize-winning author Saul Bellow was born in Canada in 1915. When he was 9 years old, his family moved to Chicago, a city that would become the backdrop to much of his writing.
You speak very affectionately of the Chicago of your youth, the confluence of immigrant communities arriving in this great heartland city of Chicago. You've written about it in several places, and always with a great affection for that time. Could you describe a little what you feel affectionate about? Did you live in a closed community? Was your, as it were, tribe a closed community? Did they spread over, or did they stick together?
Well, the effort of the family was to keep the community closed. And a routine was developed for Jewish kids. They went to school where they did extremely well, and then they took music lessons, and that was supposed to keep them off the street. And then they had their Hebrew and religious instruction. That was supposed to keep them off the street. But the power of the street was such that I soon broke with this, as did my brothers, as did most of the young people of that time.
What about the place itself? Chicago is a place that's generated a lot of myths about itself, which people see around the world, particularly on films and movies. What about that Chicago of gangsters and stockyards and certain brutality and ferocity of capitalism? Did that impinge on you at all?
Well, I was 16 or 17 years old and in no condition to judge well what Chicago was, but I certainly felt the excitement of all this, and at the same time a sort of a continual current of depression, of ugliness, of forbidding ugliness and violence. You had only to know what the Chicago police were like, or what the precinct captains of the Democratic Party in Chicago were like, to feel how strongly your illusions of progress could be challenged, you see.
Saul Bellow was central to, and perhaps the star of, that wonderful flow and group of Jewish writers who came to dominate American literature after World War II and spread their influence around world literature. Isaac Bashevis Singer, Bellow, Malamud, up to Roth, and more of them, and more still going on. And I remember when the first time I had heard Saul, I thought somebody had put a torch inside my head, I mean a flaming torch. It was all alive and re-febrilized, if that makes any sense. It acted on me as if I'd had an injection, a shot of something. I think a lot of people in my generation felt that. He hauled in ideas which addressed the time, which was so many and varied and different, which seemed to have a Russian rather than an American sense of the wideness and proportion of the world, wideness of thought of what people could think and how much they could think.
There is sort of unregenerate Philistinism in Chicago. I think that Philistines elsewhere have to work out an ideology in order to sustain their Philistinism, whereas in Chicago there is no ideology of, there's no defensive ideology for Philistines. The word has not yet reached them of the undesirability of being a Philistine.
It's just it's raw.
Just the good old raw USA, just as it was in the beginning.
And this was something that you were charged with as part of your tradition inside the family, was it?
Yes, you had better make good somehow or other.
and particularly through words. Was that a charge? Make good through words rather than anything else?
Well, words are the poor boy's arsenal, just as they had been for H.G. Wells or Arnold Bennett or, for that matter, James Joyce. What else did they have in Dublin or in London?
His father actually made it in Chicago, finally. I mean, he started his own business selling wood chips to bakeries all over Chicago. And he was helped, the father was helped by Bellow's older brothers, who were both businessmen, both immensely successful, both became millionaires. Bellow grew up in a family which was prosperous, but also, I mean, though the father had read, I mean, his interests were mostly Philistine. And he couldn't understand why his youngest son was messing around with all these books and so forth. In the family, he was known as a schmuck with a pen. When he won the Nobel Prize, his older brother Maury, very influential figure in his life, couldn't believe that he wasn't the one who won the Nobel. He had made much more money than Bellow. Why should Bellow have got the Nobel Prize and not him?
In The Dean's December, Bellow depicts the Chicago of the 1980s. Its central character, Albert Cord, is a dean of journalism at the university there. In the book, Cord sets out from the comfortable downtown world to report on the streets of the black ghettos.
This is Dean Cord recalling a conversation. The thought I had then, I can recall clearly. I said that America no more knew what to do with this black underclass than it knew what to do with its children. It was impossible for it to educate either, or to bind either to life. It was not itself securely attached to life just now. Sensing this, the children attached themselves to the black underclass, achieving a kind of coalescence with the demand mass. It was not so much the inner city slum that threatened us as the slum of innermost being, of which the inner city was perhaps a material representation. What you have in effect in the city of Chicago is any number of segregated populations, white as well as black, the whites segregating themselves for defensive purposes, the blacks having a segregation imposed upon them by this, by the kind of life, if it is a kind of life, which has been allowed to grow in the black ghettos, so that there is nothing at all, nobody has thought of anything to attach these people to life humanly.
And so it's not only systems that have failed, it's the actual language of telling ourselves about the system that has failed.
Well, it has been one of the achievements of literature to make human beings aware of the fact that they are human. That's what it's about. I don't know that anything else, particularly in the present age, makes them aware of that. Is sociology going to tell us that we're human? Is psychology going to tell us with the unique power that literature has, that we are human? Are the social workers going to tell us? Are the politicians going to tell us? Are the media going to tell us? None of these classes of people have the language to do it with. There is a way of putting these things which cannot be resisted and which compels people to experience them.
Do you feel then that the novel has a critical part to play in explaining people to themselves at this particular time?
Well, I wasn't doing it deliberately. I'd always sympathized with the Hemingway attitude. If you're looking for a message, try Western Union. I wasn't trying to deliver any sort of message. I was trying to express the feeling of a writer who, after some 40 years of practicing his trade, has a fresh look at the city in which he spent most of his life.
Saul Bellows' novel, The Dean's December, is in part a study of the disintegration of American cities. But it's set not in America, but east of the Iron Curtain in Romania, where the protagonist, Dean Cord, and his wife Minna have gone to attend the last days of her dying mother.
By setting so much of the book in a, as it were, a communist capital, from which the Dean Cord comments on the, or it could be some sort of capitalist capital, Chicago, you inevitably draw a tale of two cities in a way, with ironies, contrasts, paradoxes, and some sort of comparisons. What, in summary, would be your feeling about the contrasts and comparisons between the two cities, the communist and the capitalist?
Well, I suppose I would have to go back to my own origins. My parents were East Europeans, and when I go to Eastern Europe, even now, I very quickly pick up resemblances. And I think of the old days, probably because of my childhood, as days of warmth, characterized by family closeness and all the good old virtues of which I saw disintegrating as I grew older in Chicago. Now, I might have seen them disintegrating in Europe too, but what people in the West would call backwardness in Eastern Europe does seem to have to carry with it a certain kind of human attachment or warmth that you don't actually see very frequently in the West anymore.
Coming through that to one theme in the book, women are seen with great tenderness, and Cord himself has a relationship with women which is seems to me to be altogether almost positive and firm. Is that, would you say that is true?
Well, I think the Court finds that the defenders of a feeling, or if you like, the custodians of the emotional life, and the protectresses of morality are to be found in this, well, I don't know what to call it except a sort of matriarchy. They are the ones who hold things together. And
when you yourself were in Bucharest, is
yes, when I saw that,
yeah.
I was much moved by it.
Saul Bellow wanted the novel to carry a lot. He wanted to carry a lot about how the world is now. He wanted to carry a lot from his Yiddish-speaking past, his Chicago life with his brothers in Chicago, his family in Chicago, and the idea of America. One of his novels famously begins, I am an American Chicago-born. I think that's the beginning of Borgimarsh. And he tried, bringing all that into play on the page is one thing. To try to bring it into play in the conversation is another. I don't know whether he succeeded or not. But along the way, he said, as he always does say, a great number of interesting things. The idea, above all, I think, that the novel is the best way that people have yet found to tell you what being human is like. And that's been picked up by a lot of his disciples, that very phrase.
The old populist assumption about the common reader in the United States is dead wrong. It's not true. People do think, they must think. How long can we go on pretending that there's a sort of dead level of gutter ignorance which novelists are supposed to defer to? I think we're dealing with a storm of abstractions all about us, and it would be truly unrealistic to omit those from any account of modern life. Therefore, I try to include them. I don't claim too much for them. I don't claim that the thoughts are thoughts of a very high order, but purely as a chronicler of American society, I think it would be an unforgivable omission if I were not to do that. European readers have found this very telling, very interesting. Many American readers have too, but there's been an immense resentment in Chicago about it, of which I have received reports. People saying, we have to live this, why do we have to read it too? Isn't that enough?
And does that surprise you?
No, I thought that I was going to stir up a great deal of feeling. I knew that I was violating certain taboos. I knew, since I've been a writer long enough to have learned how frequently one's words are turned around and how easy it is to be misinterpreted by a large public. I knew that there was trouble brewing. But if I may say so, I felt that it would be wrong of me simply to wrap myself in my honors and lie down quietly. I couldn't bear the thought of that.
There's this incident at the end of his life, which I write about at the very beginning of the first volume of my biography, which he was on his deathbed, moving in and out of consciousness, visited by a friend who all of a sudden noticed that his eyes were open, and he looked at the friend, and he said, "Was I a man or was I a jerk?" And by man, I believe he meant mensch, the Yiddish mensch. Being a mensch has nothing to do with how much money you've made or how many prizes you've won and so forth. It has to do with your responsibilities as a man, say, to your family, to the people you've loved, and so forth. He could behave with great loyalty. He was a mensch to his family, to his siblings. But he also was very impulsive. He had moments of injudiciousness. He was not one to turn the other cheek. He could be vengeful. He came from a hard world. His father and brothers were tough, and they valued toughness. They had to fight to get where they were, and he was the same way in his life. So he made a lot of mistakes. He also had the sort of selfishness of someone determined to make it, determined to be a great artist.
For 40 years, I've been an observer of human beings, asking myself, can it be that they are only what they appear to be? Am I not misled by the attitudes that they assume, by the habits that they have developed, by the language that they use? Now, this is one of the themes of the book, because Cord simply refuses to accept that people in their ordinary self-presentation are no more than what they appear to be. He refuses to, as I have refused in my life, to be bound to surface appearances, feeling that the real job, the real task of a writer is to penetrate with his own transforming powers, to find what is essentially human under all of these disguises or appearances.
And that's taken up in the very final page or two of the book, where he's on looking up at the stars at Mount Palomar, isn't it?
Yes, he's looking at the stars at Mount Palomar. He realizes that these are what he sees in the heavens is not what there is actually to be seen. He sees these lights, specks, sort of astral row of some sort scattered over the heavens, and he thinks that what he sees above him at night is not the actual heavens. He compares this to what he sees when he looks at the faces of other people, that he's not seeing them either. He no more sees them in actuality than he sees the stars in actuality. and that it is his business, therefore, to penetrate with his being into their being. The sky was tense with stars, but not so tense as he was in his breast. And what he saw with his eyes was not even the real heavens. No, only white marks, bright vibrations, clouds of sky row, tokens of the real thing, only as much as could be taken in through the distortions of the atmosphere. Through these distortions, you saw objects, forms, partial realities. The rest was to be felt. And it wasn't only that you felt, but that you were drawn to feel and to penetrate further, as if you were being informed that what was spread over you had to do with your existence, down to the very blood and the crystal forms inside your bones. Rocks, trees, animals, men and women, these also drew you to penetrate further under the distortions comparable to the atmospheric ones, shadows within shadows, to find their real being with your own. This was the sense in which you were drawn.